No one expected anything remarkable that day in the rain-soaked auction yard at the edge of Willow Creek, Oklahoma, least of all Eli Harper. The sky was the color of old pewter, and fat drops hammered the roofs of battered pickup trucks and cattle trailers, beating out the slow heartbeat of a restless crowd. Boots scuffed in the mud as grizzled ranchers and sharp-eyed dealers huddled under the thin shelter of the awning, bidding on half-wild horses nobody wanted. The rain had driven away the hopeful, left only the desperate and the hard. Eli stood apart, collar pulled high against the chill, fingers trembling in his old field jacket, memories of war flickering like lightning in the back of his mind. He'd spent most of his adult life patching up wounds in places that didn't show up on maps, and some nights he still heard the distant echoes, sirens, explosions, the hush before gunfire. He never expected a horse to call him back to life. That was before he saw Thunderbolt. They brought him out last, a battered, coal-black Mustang, mane tangled and wild, eyes fierce and rolling. Even under layers of filth and scarring, Thunderbolt looked like something ancient, untamed, proud, dangerous. The auctioneer's voice, slick with disbelief, called out, "Lot 63, folks. What am I bid for this outlaw?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "That horse is cursed. Broke old man Simmons's arm last spring. Threw 3 trainers." Eli barely heard them. Something in Thunderbolt's gaze stopped him. The horse was trembling, yes, but it wasn't fear. There was a challenge in his stance, a desperate kind of hope. Eli felt it like a punch to the ribs. "Do I hear 500? The crowd jeered. "You'd have to pay me to take him." Eli lifted his hand. 500. Heads whipped around. The auctioneer blinked, then pressed on. "All right, 550? A heavy-set rancher in a white hat grinned. 600, just for dog food." Eli kept his gaze steady. 700. The bids came faster now, not because anyone wanted Thunderbolt, but because they wanted to see how far the fool in the army jacket would go. The price climbed, voices taunting, laughter rolling like thunder. 900. Eli's jaw set. 1,000. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, then dropped. "Sold. To the gentleman at the back." The yard went quiet. Eli stepped forward, mud sucking at his boots, and met Thunderbolt's wild eyes. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or a truce. The handlers muttered as they passed the lead rope, hands trembling. "Watch yourself, buddy." Eli nodded. Voice steady. "I've seen worse." Loading Thunderbolt was a battle of patience, coaxing and whispered promises in the rain. The horse reared once, snorting, but Eli held his ground, letting the Mustang test his resolve. He spoke softly, the way he'd talked men down from panic halfway around the world. After a tense, breathless minute, Thunderbolt stepped up into the trailer, water dripping from his flanks, head high. A teenager in a Caldwell Ranch jacket spat in the mud as Eli passed. "Enjoy your curse, hero. Bet you don't last a week." Eli ignored him. He drove out through the puddles, the old truck's wipers thumping, Thunderbolt shifting nervously in the trailer behind. He tried not to think about what he'd just done. Spending the last of his savings on a broken Mustang everyone said was better off put down. But the memory of those wild eyes haunted him, tugged him forward. The road out of town wound through low fields and scrub oak, gray with mist. Eli checked his mirrors, nerves tight. He'd made enemies in stranger places than this, but something felt off. He spotted headlights behind him, a black pickup, big tires chewing up the gravel, creeping closer. Eli's pulse jumped. He eased off the gas, hoping they'd pass, but the truck held steady, just a length behind. Then, without warning, the pickup surged, engine roaring. Edging into the opposite lane, Eli swerved, heart pounding, as the truck angled to force him off the shoulder. He gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and braked hard, gravel spitting. The truck veered, nearly clipping the trailer. For a split second, Eli saw the driver's face. Sunglasses, a Caldwell ranch cap, a cruel grin, before the pickup sped ahead, fishtailing through the rain. Eli let out a shaky breath, the echoes of old firefights buzzing in his ears. Thunderbolt kicked in the trailer, panicked. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now. I promise." He watched the taillights vanish into the storm, a sinking dread settling in his gut. Someone wanted Thunderbolt badly enough to threaten a stranger on a country road, and Eli had just painted a target on his own back. But turning around was never in his nature. He drove on, headlights slashing through rain, the battered Mustang shifting behind him. Both of them outcasts now, marked, watched, hunted. Somewhere in the darkness, Thunderbolt stomped once, as if warning the world that he was still here, still fighting. Eli found himself almost smiling. Let them come. The rain hadn't let up all night. It fell in heavy sheets, turning Eli Harper's rundown barn into a fortress of shadows and cold. Thunderbolt paced restlessly in the stall, hooves drumming a nervous rhythm on the packed earth, flanks slick with sweat despite the chill. Eli stood just inside the barn door, arms folded, senses wired, every muscle tensed and alert. He'd spent years on the edge, in places where you learn to sleep with one eye open. Tonight felt just like that. Only this time, the enemy wasn't clear, and the battlefield was his own home. He was brushing Thunderbolt's mane, speaking low and steady. "You're all right, buddy. You're home now." His words were a mantra, meant as much for himself as the horse. Thunderbolt's breathing slowed, but his ears stayed pinned back, eyes flicking to every noise outside. Lightning flashed through a crack in the old boards, and for a second, Eli caught sight of something strange, a half-burned brand on the horse's flank, jagged and raw beneath the mud and matted hair. He moved closer, wiping away the grime, and his gut clenched. The twisted shape matched a mark he'd seen on the Caldwell Ranch cattle, a symbol that meant trouble for anyone who got too close. Eli's mind raced. Why would the Caldwells brand a Mustang? And why try to cover it up? He remembered the black pickup, the reckless driver trying to run him off the road. It wasn't about pride, or even just money. Somebody wanted this horse for a reason. Eli felt the old instincts rising, the ones that had kept him alive when everything went wrong. Suddenly, a board creaked outside the barn. Thunderbolt snorted, eyes wide. Eli's hand went automatically to the flashlight tucked in his pocket. He killed the main barn light and pressed himself against the wall, listening. Boots crunched on wet gravel, then the hush of voices, low, urgent, unmistakably menacing. He peered through a gap in the boards and counted 3 figures moving stealthily around the side. One of them carried a crowbar, another a coil of rope, faces hidden beneath rain-soaked bandanas. Eli's pulse quickened. He scanned the barn for something, anything, he could use. He found an old pitchfork, gripped it tight, and eased toward the door, willing his breath to stay calm. The latch rattled. One of the men tried the handle, found it barred, cursed under his breath. A second man moved to a window, prying at the rotten wood. Thunderbolt tossed his head, letting out a sharp, frightened whinny. The sound shattered the night. The barn door shuddered under a heavy blow. Eli braced himself as the panel split, the first masked intruder lunging inside. Without hesitation, Eli drove the pitchfork into the dirt in front of him and shouted, "Back off!" The man froze, startled by Eli's presence. "We just want the horse, man. Nobody has to get hurt." Another man slipped through the busted window, swinging the crowbar. Thunderbolt, wild with panic, kicked at the stall door, splinters flying. Eli dodged as the crowbar swung at his shoulder, the blow glancing off his jacket. He jabbed the pitchfork toward the attacker, who stumbled back, swearing. Thunderbolt's strength exploded. He crashed through the stall door with a force Eli hadn't thought possible, rearing and kicking with furious abandon. One intruder lunged with the rope, but Thunderbolt lashed out, catching him square in the chest and sending him sprawling. Another tried to grab the halter, but Thunderbolt bit down on the man's sleeve, jerking him off balance. The barn became a chaos of flying hooves, shouts, and desperate scrabbling in the mud. "Get him out!" one of the attackers yelled. "Hurry!" Eli threw himself into the fray, using his body as a shield between the horse and the intruders. He grabbed the nearest man by the collar and slammed him against a support beam, growling, "You picked the wrong barn!" The third man bolted, slipping in the mud. The one with the crowbar scrambled after him, clutching his arm where Thunderbolt had connected. The man in the rope mask hesitated, meeting Eli's eyes for a moment. A flash of fear. Then he turned and ran. In seconds, the barn was silent except for Thunderbolt's ragged breaths and the rain hammering the roof. Eli panted, adrenaline still surging, muscles shaking with effort and relief. He checked the horse over, hands trembling, as he ran them down Thunderbolt's flanks, whispering, "You did good, boy. You're safe, you hear me." With trembling fingers, Eli found his cell and dialed the sheriff. It rang 3 times before a tired voice answered, "This better be important." Eli didn't waste time. "It's Harper. Someone just tried to steal my horse. 3 men, Caldwell marks on one of their jackets, one's limping bad. You want to come see for yourself?" The sheriff arrived within half an hour, lights flashing, rain still coming down in heavy sheets. He stepped out of the cruiser, hat pulled low, and surveyed the damage. After Eli explained what happened, the sheriff shook his head, voice grave. "Victor Caldwell owns half this town, Eli. I'm not saying you're wrong, but you just made yourself a target. I can keep an eye out, but my hands are tied when it comes to the Caldwells." Eli's jaw tightened. "I'm not giving up this horse, or letting anyone push me around." The sheriff nodded, respect flickering in his tired eyes. "Just watch your back, son. I've seen what the Caldwells can do." After the cruiser left, Eli spent the rest of the night patching the broken stall and sitting beside Thunderbolt. He barely slept, every shadow outside the barn a threat, every gust of wind a warning. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a purpose burn in his chest, a fight he couldn't walk away from, and a creature who needed him as much as he needed someone to believe in. Somewhere out in the darkness, he knew the Caldwell men were licking their wounds, plotting their next move. But for now, man and Mustang shared the silence. Survivors both, ready for whatever would come. Eli Harper sat on a hay bale in the corner of the dimly lit barn, listening to the rain patter against the roof. Thunderbolt stood nearby, shifting restlessly, eyes still darting to every shadow. The barn was patched and battered from the break-in, but Eli refused to let fear seep into the walls. Instead, he made a habit of spending the nights here, watchful, determined not to let the past repeat itself. Sometimes, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd hum old army tunes or whisper stories from a childhood spent under these same Oklahoma skies. Thunderbolt seemed to listen, ears flicking, tension in his body slowly unwinding as the hours dragged on. The horse was still wild, scars both visible and unseen running deep. But Eli sensed a fragile trust beginning to form. It was in the way Thunderbolt would approach for a handful of oats, or let Eli brush the knots from his mane without recoiling. Still, Eli couldn't ignore the nightmares. Some nights, The memories crashed in. The shouting, the panic, the split-second decisions that decided who lived and who didn't. His hands would shake as he poured feed or fixed a broken latch. But each morning, seeing Thunderbolt still there, alive and whole, anchored Eli in a way nothing else had in years. That's when Lena showed up. He noticed her first as a shape in the gloom outside the paddock, small, wiry, all elbows and attitude. She stood just outside the fence line, hood pulled low, sneakers caked in mud. For days, Eli pretended not to see her, though he knew she was watching. Maybe she saw the way he sang old lullabies to Thunderbolt, or how he talked to the horse like they were the only two souls in the world who understood each other. One afternoon, after another night of broken sleep, Eli found her inside the barn. She was squatting beside Thunderbolt's stall, feeding him apple slices with careful fingers. The horse, to Eli's surprise, was calm, head low, eyes half closed, accepting her presence without a hint of fear. Eli kept his tone even. "You planning on stealing my horse or just making friends?" Lena straightened, not backing down. "He looked hungry. I figured you could use the help." Eli studied her, noticing the torn backpack slung over one shoulder, the tired set of her jaw. He remembered his own nights on the run, the ache of having nowhere safe to go. He nodded once. "Feed's over there. If you want to help, you might as well do it right." Lena grinned, and just like that, she became part of the nightly routine. She knew how to move quietly, how to calm a skittish animal, and she never asked questions about the locks on the barn doors, or why Eli kept a baseball bat within reach. Instead, she told stories about life in the foster system, about the times she'd slept in bus stations or under playground slides, about why she never, ever trusted men in shiny trucks or expensive boots. Thunderbolt responded to her patience in ways Eli couldn't have predicted. At first, the horse would only take treats from Lena's outstretched palm, nostrils flaring as he sniffed her scent. Then he began to accept brushing, standing quietly while Lena worked knots out of his mane, her voice soft and reassuring. The first time Thunderbolt nuzzled Lena's hand, Eli caught the look of surprise and shy pride on her face. "See that?" Lena whispered. "He knows I'm not like them." Eli smiled, tension easing from his shoulders. "He knows you're good people, Lena." The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Eli and Lena worked side by side, cleaning stalls, patching broken boards, fixing what the storm and the break-in had left behind. Some evenings, they'd sit in the paddock, sharing peanut butter sandwiches and stories under the dim barn light. The farm was still rough, money was still tight, but for the first time in a long while, Eli felt the beginnings of hope. But it wasn't all peace. There were moments when Thunderbolt would startle at a distant engine or bolt at a loud noise, trembling so hard Eli thought he might shatter. Sometimes Lena would disappear for hours, coming back with bruises she wouldn't explain. The world outside the barn was still hostile, still hungry for easy victims, but inside those walls, a fragile sanctuary held. Late one night, after the third straight evening of thunderstorms, Lena found Eli sitting on the floor, back against the stall, staring into the darkness. "You can't sleep either?" she asked, her voice low. He shook his head. "Not much." She sat beside him, knees pulled up to her chest. "I used to be scared of thunderstorms, but out here with you and Thunderbolt, it's not so bad." Eli let the silence stretch. It helps, having someone to talk to, even if it's just a horse. They laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Thunderbolt shifted, nudged Lena's shoulder, and for a moment, the three of them just breathed together. Three survivors, stitched together by chance and stubbornness. Each small victory, a horse eating from Lena's hand, a night spent without fear, a story shared over sandwiches, was a brick in the wall they built against the world. It was slow going, but Eli understood now that healing never happened all at once. You won trust the same way you won freedom, one long, sleepless night at a time. As dawn crept in through the cracks in the boards, Eli glanced at Lana and Thunderbolt, heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, they'd all make it out of this together. The sun broke through the Oklahoma clouds for the first time in days, turning the battered yard into a patchwork of gold and shadow. Eli noticed how the light made everything seem possible, even as the air still smelled of rain and broken trust. The barn had become a refuge not just for Thunderbolt, but for everyone who needed a second chance. Lina had become a fixture, showing up every morning with stubborn determination, her eyes still ringed with the kind of tiredness that came from running too long. She never asked for help, but Eli started leaving an extra sandwich on the fence post or a clean towel on a hay bale, and she always found them, always pretended it was her idea to eat or wash up. Sometimes Eli wondered how many nights she'd spent listening for footsteps in the dark, hoping they'd never stop at her door. Thunderbolt was changing too. The wild panic in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a wary curiosity. He watched Eli and Lena with his ears perked, and each day he let them get a little closer, his trust growing inch by inch. It was a quiet miracle, the kind you didn't notice until suddenly you realized you'd started to believe in them again. That's when Mrs. Jackson came back into their lives. She lived a quarter-mile up the road in a weathered farmhouse surrounded by pecan trees and chickens that seemed to run the place more than she did. Mrs. Jackson was the kind of neighbor who showed up whether you wanted her to or not, arms full of home-baked bread or jars of peach preserves, voice like gravel and honey. She arrived that morning with a basket under one arm and a look that said she was here to stay. "Eli Harper, you've been up half the night again, haven't you?" she called from the gate. Eli wiped sweat from his brow, managed a sheepish grin. "Just keeping the place in one piece, ma'am." Mrs. Jackson sniffed, glanced at Lana, then at Thunderbolt. "Looks like you've got yourself a crew." She handed Lena the basket. "There's cinnamon rolls in there, child, and eggs from the bossiest hen you'll ever meet. Eat while they're warm." Lena blinked, not sure whether to trust this kindness, but the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread broke her reserve. She sat cross-legged in the grass, tearing off a piece and sharing the first bite with Thunderbolt, who nickered approvingly. Mrs. Jackson surveyed the barn, taking in the patched boards, the makeshift locks, the battered tools. "This place looks like a war zone, Eli. What happened?" Eli hesitated, then shrugged. "Some folks don't like that I brought Thunderbolt home." She nodded, her jaw tightening. "Caldwell's boys?" Eli nodded once, not needing to say more. Mrs. Jackson leaned in, voice low. "You know Victor Caldwell's been trying to buy up every inch of this land for years. He hates anyone he can't own, especially someone with a backbone. But you're not alone, Eli, not while I'm breathing." It was the first time Eli realized he had allies, even if they weren't many. The world outside might be hostile, but here in this patch of stubborn grass and patched-up dreams, there was safety. Days passed, each one brighter than the last. Mrs. Jackson came every afternoon, arms loaded with fresh vegetables, laughter, and advice Lena pretended not to need, but always listened to. Sometimes the three of them would sit on the porch after chores, Lena working on math homework, Eli nursing a mug of strong coffee, and Mrs. Jackson telling stories about a time when the town was wilder and justice was something you took care of yourself. It wasn't just about chores and meals. The little moments stitched them together. Lena's tentative questions about algebra, Eli's slow explanations, Mrs. Jackson's steady encouragement. Eli saw how Lena straightened her shoulders when Mrs. Jackson praised her work, how the girl flinched less when someone raised their voice. For his part, Eli found comfort in Mrs. Jackson's presence. She noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hands sometimes shook when thunder rolled in the distance. She'd simply sit beside him in silence, her strength a quiet anchor. Thunderbolt continued to heal both inside and out. He let Lena braid his mane with wildflowers, let Mrs. Jackson rub ointment on the old scars. Sometimes at sunset, he'd run along the fence line, mane streaming, no longer just surviving but reclaiming the freedom he'd been denied for so long. But not everyone in town saw the beauty of this ragtag family. At the feed store, Eli overheard the whispers. "That Harper boy's always been strange. Now he's collecting strays." Another muttered, "That Mustang's cursed, bringing nothing but trouble." Eli ignored them, just as he always had. But the words burned all the same. Sometimes, a neighbor would leave extra hay by the gate or slip a bag of apples onto the porch without a word. There were those who quietly believed, even if they were too scared of the Caldwells to say so out loud. It was enough for Eli, enough for Lena, enough for Thunderbolt. One stormy evening, as lightning flickered on the horizon, Lena hesitated at the door. "You think they'll come back?" she asked, her voice small. Eli met her eyes, steady and certain. "Maybe. But we're ready this time. We look out for each other, Lena. That's what family does." She nodded, relief flickering across her face. Mrs. Jackson gathered them both in a fierce hug. "Ain't nothing breaks this family unless we let it. Not Caldwell, not the past, not fear." As the rain began again, the little farmhouse glowed with light and laughter, the sound of hope echoing through every room. Out in the barn, Thunderbolt stamped and snorted, as if declaring to the world that he too belonged, that this, finally, was home. And for the first time in a long while, Eli Harper believed it too. The days grew longer, but a shadow stretched over Eli's small farm. Word of Thunderbolt's presence, and the fight that had kept him there, spread through Willow Creek like a storm rolling in from the west. Folks at the diner fell silent when Eli walked in, some looking away, some watching too close. Mrs. Jackson told him not to worry, but he saw her peering through the curtains more often now, her shotgun propped by the door. One hot afternoon, as Lena finished grooming Thunderbolt in the paddock, Eli worked on a broken fence rail by the gate. Sweat trickled down his brow, mixing with the dust, and the hammer in his hand felt heavier than usual. Even Thunderbolt seemed tense, tail swishing, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the pasture. A low rumble of engines broke the stillness. 2 black trucks rolled up the gravel drive, crawling to a stop with a menace that couldn't be mistaken for anything but deliberate. Eli straightened, the hammer held loosely at his side. Lena froze, hand clutching Thunderbolt's mane. Mrs. Jackson appeared on the porch, her expression like iron. From the lead truck stepped Victor Caldwell. He looked every inch the king of Willow Creek, broad-shouldered, white Stetson gleaming, expensive boots that never touched the mud. Behind him, his enforcer Silas followed, a mountain of a man, face marked by an old scar and eyes as cold as a winter pond. A third man stayed with the trucks, engine idling, phone pressed to his ear. Victor approached, his smile tight and practiced. "Eli Harper, I hear you've been entertaining my horse." Eli didn't blink. "He's not your horse, Victor. I bought him fair and square." Victor's eyes narrowed, the smile dropping. There's nothing fair about what you did, boy. That Mustang belonged to my ranch. He's got our brand, and I intend to take him back. Silas shifted, arms folded, gaze fixed on Lena with a look that made her shrink behind Thunderbolt. Eli saw it, a flicker of recognition, a flash of old fear in Lena's eyes. Victor spread his hands, voice oily. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I'm a reasonable man. Sell him back, say double what you paid, and you can walk away. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody loses. Eli held Victor's gaze. I'm not selling, and I'm not scared of you. Victor's patience snapped, and the threat in his tone was unmistakable. You ought to be. Accidents happen to stubborn men, Eli. Fences break, barns catch fire. People go missing. You think this town will choose you over me? Mrs. Jackson's voice cut through the tension, sharp as a whip. You're not the law here, Caldwell. Last I checked, you can't buy every soul in Oklahoma. Victor looked her up and down, then dismissed her with a curl of his lip. Careful, Evelyn. Sometimes the wind changes, and old trees get uprooted. Eli planted his feet. We're done here. Get off my land. Silas stepped forward, looming over Lena. She trembled, her hand white-knuckled in Thunderbolt's mane. Eli moved between them, meeting Silas's dead stare. You lay a hand on her. You answer to me. Victor waved a dismissive hand, signaling Silas back. Let's go. But think hard, Eli. My offer expires at sundown. After that, no more Mr. Nice Guy. They retreated to the trucks, engines growling. As they pulled away, a shower of gravel sprayed the mailbox. The third man, eyes hidden behind mirrored shades, made a throat-cutting gesture as they vanished down the drive. Lina was shaking, her voice a whisper. That's him. That's the man who found me near the Caldwell Ranch last spring. He said if I ever came back, he'd make me regret it. Mrs. Jackson wrapped her arms around Lina, pulling her close. You're safe here, honey. He's not laying a finger on you. Not while I'm breathing. Eli stared after the trucks, anger boiling beneath his calm. Victor's not used to losing. He's going to come harder next time. Thunderbolt, sensing the storm in his humans, pawed at the ground and tossed his head, nostrils flaring. Eli stroked the horse's neck, murmuring, We're not running, boy. Not now. Not ever. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Lina helped Eli double-check the barn doors and reinforce the windows. Mrs. Jackson baked cornbread and made chili, insisting everyone eat, though none of them tasted much. Night fell early, the fields outside swallowed by darkness, every sound magnified, every creak a warning. After dinner, Lina found Eli sitting alone on the porch, staring into the night. She sat beside him, silent for a long while before speaking. Are you scared? Eli took a deep breath. Yeah, but being scared doesn't mean giving up. It just means you fight smarter. She nodded, then laid her head on his shoulder, the gesture more comforting than she knew. Inside, Mrs. Jackson locked the doors and checked her shotgun twice. Thunderbolt rested in the barn, ears alert, head raised whenever the wind shifted. Outside, the town slept, but Eli knew trouble was wide awake and prowling. He promised himself, and the makeshift family that had grown around him, that he would stand his ground, no matter what price came with it. The Oklahoma dusk rolled in heavy, stained with the promise of trouble. Eli Harper couldn't sleep. He paced the creaking boards of the farmhouse, eyes flicking from the barn window to the long shadows outside. The threats from Caldwell hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. Lina sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Jackson, pretending to study, but really listening for the sound of engines. Thunderbolt was restless too, his silhouette visible through the barn's open doors, pacing, ears pinned back, every sense tuned to danger. It was Lena who saw it first. A strange, flickering glow down by the barn, orange and hungry, dancing in the dark where it didn't belong. She shot to her feet, words stuck in her throat. Eli was already moving, instincts flaring to life, every muscle snapping into action. "Stay inside!" he barked, grabbing the old fire extinguisher and bolting out the door, boots pounding wet grass. But Lena was right behind him, stubborn and terrified, and Mrs. Jackson not far behind, her flashlight and shotgun in hand. As they reached the barn, the truth hit hard. Flames were licking up the side, climbing fast, smoke curling through the broken window left from the last attack. The air crackled with heat and fear. Thunderbolt screamed, trapped in his stall, hooves kicking at the boards in blind panic. "Go, Lena! Open the back!" Eli yelled, shoving the extinguisher at Mrs. Jackson as he dove for the barn door. He barely registered the shape of a man in a ball cap running off into the woods, a shadow lost to the night, cowardly and quick. No time for revenge, only survival. Inside, the heat was suffocating, sparks raining from the rafters as Eli forced the stall open. Thunderbolt's eyes rolled white, nostrils flaring. Eli grabbed his halter, voice low and urgent. "Easy, boy. Come on. Trust me." The Mustang hesitated, wild and quaking, flames reflecting in his dark eyes. Eli tugged gently, murmuring steady nonsense, the same words he'd used to calm wounded soldiers under fire. Thunderbolt backed away, snorting, but Eli refused to let go. The barn was filling with smoke, the roar of fire drowning everything. Suddenly, Lena appeared at the back door, coughing, face streaked with soot. "Eli!" she called, waving him through a gap in the boards. He coaxed Thunderbolt forward, step by agonizing step, feeling the heat licking his back. A timber crashed behind them, sending a rain of sparks over his shoulder. Thunderbolt lunged, nearly bowling Eli over, but he held on, muscles screaming. Together they burst through the broken rear doors, stumbling into the fresh, cool air. Mrs. Jackson was waiting, spraying water at the base of the flames, yelling, "Get him away! Go! Get clear!" The old woman's face was set, determined, hair wild in the glow of firelight. Eli and Lena led Thunderbolt away from the burning barn, into the darkness at the edge of the pasture. The sky was a sea of orange and black, embers floating up like angry stars. Lena was crying, coughing, dragging her sleeve across her face, but she didn't let go of Thunderbolt's lead. The horse trembled, sides heaving, but trusted their hands, moving as they guided him past the smoke and chaos. For a terrifying moment, Eli thought the wind would carry the fire to the house, but the barn stood alone, doomed and defiant. Mrs. Jackson sprayed until the extinguisher ran dry, then beat back the flames with wet towels and buckets of muddy rainwater. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on in the distance, but no one dared come close. Everyone knew whose anger this fire belonged to. When the last timber collapsed and the fire died down, the barn was nothing but smoking ruin. The three survivors sat in the grass, exhaustion and disbelief settling heavy. Thunderbolt, still shaking, pressed his nose into Lena's hair, seeking comfort. Mrs. Jackson lowered herself to the ground, shotgun across her knees, sweat and soot streaking her face. They said nothing for a long while. The only sound was the far-off siren of a volunteer fire truck, too late for saving anything but memories. Eventually, Eli stood, fists clenched, eyes cold. "We can't stay. Caldwell won't stop. He wants us scared, wants Thunderbolt back." Mrs. Jackson nodded, pulling herself upright with a grimace. "I know a place. The old ravine, south side of the property. Nobody goes there, not even the Caldwells. If we move now, we'll beat them. Lena swallowed, voice raw. What about our things? Eli shook his head. We have what matters. You, me, Mrs. Jackson, Thunderbolt. That's all. They moved through the darkness, following Thunderbolt's uncertain but determined lead. The Mustang seemed to sense the way, picking through the underbrush with uncanny surety. The path was rough, twisted roots, hidden dips, brambles that snatched at their jeans and scratched their arms, but they pressed on, driven by adrenaline and fear. Thunderbolt was their compass, leading them down a narrow animal trail, through a gap in the fence and into the ravine, where the world shrank to shadows and the low rush of the creek. There, surrounded by wild honeysuckle and ancient stones, they finally rested, hearts still racing. The night stretched on, sleepless and tense. Mrs. Jackson kept watch, shotgun propped in her lap, while Eli and Lena curled up with Thunderbolt beneath a tangle of cedar branches. The Mustang's breathing slowed, the panic draining out of him as he lay beside them, a living shield between his family and the dark. When dawn crept in, gray and quiet, Eli found a slip of paper wedged into the folds of his coat, damp from the night dew. He opened it with numb fingers, reading the message scrawled in a hand he recognized from town notice boards. Give up the horse by sundown, or else. He crumpled the note, looking at Lena, then Mrs. Jackson, then Thunderbolt. They all knew it now. There was no going back. But they were together, and that, for now, was enough. Morning broke slowly in the ravine, a pale, watery light sifting through the branches and glinting off dew-laden grass. Eli sat with his back against a stone, boots still muddy, feeling every ache from the night before. Lena shivered beside Thunderbolt, wrapped in Mrs. Jackson's old denim jacket, her eyes puffy from exhaustion and fear. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that hangs after disaster when you're not sure what's left to lose. Thunderbolt, for his part, had pressed close all night, as if guarding the last piece of his world. He nuzzled Lena's shoulder gently, his wild eyes softer now, as if he'd finally found something worth fighting for. The ravine, hidden by thick brush and a sharp drop-off, felt safer than anywhere they'd been in days. But Eli knew it wouldn't last. Caldwell wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when the threat had become this personal. Eli was packing up what little they'd managed to bring, a water bottle, some jerky, Mrs. Jackson's faded blanket, when Lena spoke, her voice small, barely more than a breath. Eli, I need to show you something. He turned, brow furrowed. Lena fished into her backpack, fingers trembling, and pulled out a small, battered USB drive. She stared at it for a moment before holding it out. I took this from Caldwell Ranch, the night I ran away. I didn't know if I should say anything, but after what happened last night, I think it's time. Eli took the drive, turning it over in his hand. What's on it? Lena wiped her nose on her sleeve, voice cracking. It's footage from their security cameras. I used to clean the office for a few extra bucks. They treated me like I was invisible. I saw things, Eli. Bad things. Caldwell and his men. They steal wild horses, brand them, sell them off like cattle. They beat them, starve them. That's how Thunderbolt ended up with that scar. I copied some of it. Figured if I ever got caught, maybe it'd help me, or at least hurt them. Mrs. Jackson whistled softly, her face a mix of shock and admiration. You smart girl. That could put Caldwell away for good, if it's what you say. Eli squeezed Lena's shoulder, pride and anger warring in his eyes. You did the right thing, Lena. You held on to hope even when it hurt. Lena tried to smile, but her eyes filled with tears. I was scared. Still am. Eli knelt in front of her, voice gentle. We're scared together. But now we've got a way to fight back. You gave us that. The mood in the ravine shifted. Fear replaced by something new, a sense of purpose. Eli turned the plan over in his mind, thinking through every risk. We need to get this to the sheriff. The new one, not the old Caldwell puppet. If we can show them what's on this drive, maybe, just maybe, this ends tonight. Mrs. Jackson grunted, a familiar fire in her eyes. Getting into town's gonna be tricky. Caldwell's got men watching every road. We'll have to move quiet, cut through the backwoods. Think Thunderbolt's up for another adventure? Thunderbolt seemed to sense his name, ears flicking, nose pressed to Lena's palm. She stroked his cheek, whispering, "You're not the only one they tried to break, but you're still standing." They waited until midday, when the sun was high and the woods came alive with the hum of cicadas. Then, sticking to the shadows, they set out. Eli leading the way, Lena and Mrs. Jackson behind him, Thunderbolt slipping through the brush as if he'd been born wild. The path was rough, little more than a deer trail twisting through dense thickets and fallen logs. Every snap of a branch sent their hearts racing. Lena clutched the USB drive in her fist, knuckles white. They skirted a barbed wire fence, ducked under a rusted cattle gate, and followed the dry bed of a creek toward the edge of town. Twice they saw pickup trucks on the distant ridge, Caldwell's men searching. Eli motioned them down, and the four of them pressed themselves flat, waiting, breath held, as the trucks rumbled by. At one point, a stray dog barked somewhere close, sending Thunderbolt skittering, but Lena grabbed his halter and spoke low, calming him. Mrs. Jackson glanced back, a tight smile on her lips. "Never seen a horse trust a kid the way that one trusts you, Lena." "Guess we're both strays," she answered, voice stronger. They reached the edge of a soybean field, sun beating down, sweat sticking their shirts to their skin. Eli checked the horizon. Still clear for now. "If we keep to the old Miller Bridge, we can slip behind the feed store. Sheriff's office is 2 blocks from there." A distant shout echoed over the fields, angry, desperate. Caldwell's men had found the burnt barn, maybe tracks in the mud. Time was running out. Eli urged everyone forward, moving quick but careful. Thunderbolt picked his way along, staying close, never spooking. The connection between horse and humans felt almost supernatural now, a silent pact to survive. As they neared the bridge, Lena paused, turning to Eli. "If something happens, if we get split up, don't let them take him again. Thunderbolt, promise me." Eli met her gaze, steady as stone. "I promise, Lena. He's family now. So are you." Mrs. Jackson, ever the sentinel, scanned the road ahead, shotgun in hand. "Let's go. We've got one shot to get this right." Together, the four of them slipped across the old bridge, hearts pounding. In the distance, the town shimmered in the heat, quiet and dangerous. The sheriff's office just out of sight, but close enough to touch, if they could only make it. With Thunderbolt leading the way and the truth clenched in Lena's fist, they pressed on, hope burning fierce, even as danger closed in from all sides. The summer sun had dipped behind heavy clouds by the time Eli, Lena, Mrs. Jackson, and Thunderbolt reached the old river crossing on the edge of Willow Creek. The town felt eerily quiet in the distance, as if holding its breath for whatever was about to happen. Eli could taste tension in the air, bitter and electric, as they ducked behind a stand of cottonwoods, peering at the rickety one-lane bridge that spanned the muddy water. They were so close, just across the river, 2 blocks to the sheriff's office. Lena clutched the USB drive in her hand like it was a lifeline. Thunderbolt stood between her and Eli, his body a wall of tense muscle, nostrils flaring with each strange scent on the wind. Eli knelt by the water's edge, scanning both banks for trouble. Mrs. Jackson watched the tree line behind them, finger tight on her old shotgun. "Something's not right, Eli," she whispered. "I got the feeling we're not alone." He nodded, eyes narrowed. "Caldwell's not stupid. He's desperate. We have to move fast." Before he could finish, a shout rang out from the brush on the far side of the river. "There they are! By the bridge! Move!" Men burst from the trees. 4 of them. Silas was at the front, his huge frame unmistakable, shotgun in hand, Caldwell ranch hat pulled low. 2 more carried pistols, their faces twisted with the thrill of the hunt. Behind them a black truck idled, engine snarling. Victor Caldwell himself leaning against the hood, arms folded, smile tight and cold. "Get down!" Eli barked, pushing Lena and Mrs. Jackson toward the cover of a fallen log. Thunderbolt whinnied, stamping, torn between flight and fight. Eli reached for the Mustang's halter, voice urgent. "Easy, boy. We're not running yet." Victor's voice carried across the water, oily and mocking. "Thought you could just walk into town and turn us in, Harper. That's not how this ends." Silas cocked his shotgun, eyes locked on Eli. "Hand over the horse and the girl, or none of you leave this river alive." Lena's breathing came fast and shallow. She squeezed the USB so tight her knuckles whitened. Mrs. Jackson slipped 2 shells into her shotgun with calm precision. "Not today, you bastards," she muttered under her breath. Eli weighed the odds. 4 men, 3 guns, 1 way out. He looked at Mrs. Jackson, who nodded grimly. They had to create a distraction, just enough for Lana and Thunderbolt to slip away. "On my signal, run for the river," Eli whispered to Lena. "Don't stop, no matter what happens. Get to the sheriff. Give him the drive." She shook her head, terrified. "Eli, I can't." He squeezed her shoulder. "You can. Thunderbolt will get you across. Trust him." Silas started wading into the shallow edge, gun raised. "Last chance, Harper." Mrs. Jackson stood up from behind the log, shotgun raised, voice loud and clear. "You want us? You come and get us, you sons of—" She fired once, a spray of buckshot peppering the water near Silas's boots. The blast echoed through the trees, sending birds screaming into the sky. The Caldwell men ducked, shouting curses, momentarily pinned by the sudden assault. "Go!" Eli yelled. Lena bolted for the bridge, Thunderbolt beside her, hooves pounding the rotting planks. Eli followed close, heart in his throat. The bridge shook under their combined weight, wood groaning, but held. Gunshots rang out. 1, 2, whistling overhead. Mrs. Jackson pumped another round, aiming high, keeping the attackers' heads down. Silas cursed, ducked, and fired back, the shot splintering a chunk from the bridge railing. Lena stumbled, nearly dropping the USB, but Thunderbolt nudged her forward, steady and sure. The Mustang moved with the grace of something born for danger, never flinching, muscles taut beneath his black coat. On the far bank, Eli spun to see Mrs. Jackson limping after them, cradling her side, hit, but still moving, stubborn as ever. He ran back, grabbing her under the arm, hauling her to the far side as bullets thudded into the earth behind them. Victor screamed from across the river, rage and frustration boiling over. "You're dead, Harper! You hear me?" Eli turned, breathless. "Not today, Caldwell. Not ever." Just then, the wail of sirens cut through the chaos, closer than any of them expected. Red and blue lights flashed on the ridge. The new sheriff's SUV barreling down the dirt road, deputies fanning out behind him. The Caldwell men hesitated, then broke for the trees, scattering. Silas fired one last wild shot, then vanished into the brush, leaving Victor howling at the river's edge, helpless and alone. The sheriff's team swept in, weapons drawn, corralling Eli, Lena, Mrs. Jackson, and Thunderbolt into a ring of safety. "You all right?" the sheriff asked, eyeing the blood on Mrs. Jackson's shirt and the shock on Lena's face. Eli nodded, panting. "They tried to kill us. We've got proof." He gestured to Lena, who shakily handed over the USB. The sheriff took it, eyes wide as Eli explained. "It's all on there. Horse theft, abuse, illegal branding. Caldwell's behind it all. You have to stop him." The sheriff looked from Eli to the trembling Mustang, then to Lena and Mrs. Jackson. "You did good. All of you. It's over now." As deputies moved to arrest Victor, the truth finally out in the open, Eli wrapped an arm around Lena, steadying her shaking frame. Thunderbolt nuzzled her hand, blowing soft and warm, a silent promise that the worst was finally behind them. But as the sun slipped behind the clouds and the town came to life with sirens, voices, and the distant cheers of neighbors, Eli knew it wasn't just about justice for Thunderbolt or payback for the barn. It was about standing together, fighting for something bigger than any one of them. As Mrs. Jackson was loaded into the back of an ambulance, grinning through her pain, Lena pressed close to Eli, voice hoarse. "We did it, didn't we?" Eli nodded, eyes bright. "Yeah, we did." Thunderbolt raised his head, letting out a long, triumphant whinny that echoed across the water. In that moment, they were more than just survivors. They were a family, and no one, not Victor Caldwell, nor any man with a badge or a gun, could take that away. The dust had barely settled on the chaos at the river crossing when the ripples began spreading through Willow Creek. By noon the next day, everyone in town knew about the arrests, the hidden footage, and the showdown with Caldwell's men. Old-timers who'd spent years grumbling over coffee in the diner finally had something worth talking about, a story that cut through decades of fear and silence. Victor Caldwell was in jail, stripped of his swagger, pacing in a cell beneath the humming fluorescence of the sheriff's office. For the first time in living memory, no one called him sir. His lawyers squawked and threatened, but the evidence on Lena's USB drive, video after damning video of stolen horses, abuse, and secret deals, was too much for even his money to sweep away. His face on the local news looked small, lost, out of place. The entire Caldwell Ranch, once an empire, now lay under investigation, deputies crawling over every acre, searching for more hidden sins. Silas had slipped away during the confusion at the river. Some said he'd run for Texas, others whispered about the mountains. His name became a ghost around town, a cautionary tale muttered by parents who'd long feared what he might do. Lena flinched whenever his name came up, but Eli reassured her, voice steady. "He's gone, Lena. He won't hurt you. Not here, not ever again." For Eli, Lena, and Mrs. Jackson, the days that followed moved in a strange, gentle rhythm, like waking up after a long, hard winter. The authorities offered witness protection and safe housing, but Eli refused to leave the land that had become their home. Instead, with the sheriff's blessing, they rebuilt what the fire had destroyed. Neighbors, some of whom had watched from a distance for too long, finally crossed property lines with casseroles, lumber, and offers of help. Lena stayed with a foster family in town, the kind who left a light on in the kitchen and didn't ask too many questions. She visited every day after school, riding her battered bike down the dirt lane, the wheels throwing dust in the morning sun. Each time she approached, Thunderbolt would perk up at the sound of her voice, trotting to the fence for a nuzzle and a whispered secret. The two shared a bond that ran deeper than scars or fear, a trust hard-earned and never taken for granted. Eli poured himself into the rebuilding. Sawdust stuck to his hands, sweat beaded his brow, but every swing of the hammer was a piece of healing. For years, he'd carried his pain in silence, never letting the world see the cracks in his armor. But Mrs. Jackson saw past his walls. One afternoon, as they painted the new barn, she nudged his shoulder, voice soft. "You know, talking about what hurts doesn't make you weaker, Eli. It makes you braver." He nodded, considering her words. That evening, he found the courage to join the Veterans Support Group at the church hall, a room of men and women who understood nightmares and the weight of old battles. For the first time, Eli shared his story. The words came slow, halting at first, but each confession eased the burden, and the knots inside him began to untangle. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. Lena flourished in her new routine. Her foster parents cheered her on at school, helped her with homework, and insisted she join the track team. She brought home ribbons. Nothing fancy, just local races. But each one was a reminder that she belonged somewhere, that running was no longer just about escape. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but day by day she laughed louder, walked taller. The nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of open fields and a black Mustang running free. Mrs. Jackson became a kind of legend herself, the woman who stood up to Caldwell with a shotgun and cinnamon rolls, as folks at the store said. She kept everyone honest, organizing meals for families hit hardest by Caldwell's schemes, and reminding the sheriff to check on Eli and Lena. She adopted a stray dog, half blind, always underfoot, and named him Trouble, claiming every hero needed a sidekick. As for Thunderbolt, his transformation captured the town's imagination. Once called cursed and dangerous, he became a symbol of justice and hope. People came from miles around to see the Mustang who'd survived everything. Kids giggled as he tossed his head, and grown men wiped tears from their eyes, remembering their own scars. With Mrs. Jackson's help, Eli and a few others started a new program, using the barn as a sanctuary for rescue horses and troubled youth. Lina volunteered on weekends, showing nervous kids how to brush a horse's mane, how to listen and be patient. One evening, the sheriff paid a visit, his cruiser sending dust curling up the drive. He shook Eli's hand, lingered by the paddock, and watched Lena lead Thunderbolt in gentle circles. "You know, Harper," he said, "folks in this town never thought much about what happened on the margins. But you, your family, you changed things. Caldwell's gone, but what you built, that's gonna last." Eli watched Lena and Thunderbolt, his heart swelling with pride and a peace he never thought he'd feel again. "We just did what was right. For the horse, for the kid, for ourselves." The sun dipped behind the hills, lighting the fields in gold. The old barn, new boards bright against the sky, stood as proof of what could be rebuilt. The farmhouse rang with laughter and the smell of Mrs. Jackson's cornbread cooling on the windowsill. Thunderbolt trotted the fence line, tail streaming, Lina at his side, both free in ways they'd never been before. Healing, Eli learned, was never quick. But it was real, with every nail driven, every fear faced, and every hand offered in kindness. Their wounds became the foundation for something stronger, a community unafraid to fight for what mattered, and a family that, against all odds, finally found a home. The seasons turned, and with them, the rhythm of Eli Harper's life changed in quiet, extraordinary ways. Where once there had been chaos and fear, now the mornings on his small Oklahoma farm broke soft and golden, sunlight painting dew across new grass and the sturdy boards of the rebuilt barn. The land still bore scars, a charred patch where the fire had burned hottest, old boot prints fading on the lane. But they had become part of the story, reminders of what had been overcome. Thunderbolt roamed the pasture at dawn, no longer penned or wary, black coat gleaming as he trotted along the fence. He was the first thing Lena looked for each morning when her foster family dropped her off before school, and the last she said goodbye to before heading home in the evening. Thunderbolt always met her with a playful toss of his head, then pressed his nose gently to her outstretched hand, as if they shared a secret no one else could understand. On weekends, Eli, Lina, and Mrs. Jackson would share breakfast on the porch, laughter and the smell of strong coffee drifting through the fresh air. Sometimes Mrs. Jackson brought cinnamon rolls, sometimes it was just cornbread and jam, but it never mattered what was on the table, only who sat around it. Even the dog, Trouble, claimed his place, stretching out in the morning sun, content in his new kingdom. As the community slowly recovered from the damage Victor Caldwell had done, the program Eli and Mrs. Jackson started took root and blossomed. Word spread, and soon more people brought their own stories and struggles to the barn. Troubled kids, anxious veterans, battered horses, all found something of themselves in Thunderbolt's stubborn will and the kindness of this mismatched family. Lena became a mentor, teaching newcomers how to approach a skittish animal, how to listen with their hearts, how to let patience replace anger. She told her story only when asked, but her example spoke for her. Sometimes, Eli caught her and Thunderbolt racing through the fields, laughter trailing behind them, both wild and free in a way that no one could cage. He found himself watching them from the porch, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He'd never imagined he'd find peace again, or family, not after all the losses and nights spent listening for threats in the darkness. Now he could sit back, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, feeling a gentle satisfaction settle into his bones. One crisp morning, as autumn painted the leaves red and gold, Eli sat with Lena and Mrs. Jackson beneath the big pecan tree, a blanket spread over the grass, warm biscuits stacked high between them. Thunderbolt grazed nearby, Trouble chasing his own tail. Lena finished her biscuit, brushed crumbs from her jeans, and looked at Eli. "Did you ever think any of this would happen?" she asked, voice full of wonder. Eli smiled, lines around his eyes deepening. "I used to think some people were just born unlucky, Lena. But I don't believe that anymore. Not after everything we've been through." Mrs. Jackson nodded, pouring more coffee. "Luck didn't build this. Courage did. And stubbornness." She grinned at Lena. "You two have more grit than any grown man I've ever met." Eli's gaze drifted to Thunderbolt, who raised his head as if he knew he was being talked about. "I think maybe Thunderbolt taught us more than we taught him. He trusted us when he had no reason to. That's not something you can force. It's something you earn." They sat in companionable silence, the morning stretching lazy and long. The world felt different now, gentler but not softer. There was still work to be done, horses to train, fences to mend, people to help. But the hard things didn't seem so heavy anymore, not when they were shared. Later that day, Lena and Thunderbolt joined a small group of kids at the barn, some shy, some loud, all hungry for the comfort of acceptance. Lina showed them how to brush Thunderbolt's coat, patient and encouraging, laughter bubbling up when the Mustang playfully snatched a hat from a boy's head. Eli watched her, thinking about the circles life makes, how broken things can become beautiful, how outcasts can become family. That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Eli walked out to the pasture. Thunderbolt stood at the highest point, mane catching the breeze, silhouetted against the orange sky. Eli whistled softly. The Mustang flicked his ears, but didn't come. He didn't need to. He was free now, truly free, and yet he always returned at dusk, drawn by trust, by love, by the unbreakable bond they'd forged. Eli's thoughts turned inward, words rising like a quiet prayer. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands by you when everyone else turns away. It's the ones who fight for you, who help you heal, who teach you to believe again. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes courage. And sometimes, it takes a stubborn old Mustang who refuses to give up. He felt Lena's hand slip into his, small and steady. Mrs. Jackson joined them, arms wrapped around both their shoulders. "Do you think Thunderbolt will ever leave for good?" Lena asked quietly. Eli squeezed her hand. "Maybe someday. That's his right. But I think he knows he has a home here, just like we do." Thunderbolt tossed his head, as if agreeing, then galloped down the hill, free, wild, unstoppable. As the last light faded, Eli turned to the camera set up for the rescue program's website, ready to record a message for anyone searching for hope. When you stand up for the voiceless, you heal more than wounds. You heal a whole community. If Thunderbolt's story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs hope. And hope is meant to run wild. He smiled, the kind of smile that comes only after hardship, and waved at Lena and Mrs. Jackson. Thunderbolt, hearing their laughter, trotted over and nudged them, his presence a living reminder that every wound can heal and every heart can find its home. And there in the fading light, with family at his side and freedom all around, Eli Harper finally understood what it meant to belong.